The first thing the officer noticed was not the speeding. It was the smell, a heavy, sickening odor drifting through the warm night air. At first, he thought it might be coming from a nearby dumpster. Then, the wind changed, and he realized it was coming from the car. The woman behind the wheel was 33-year-old Nicole Michelle Johnson. When police pulled her over in Essex, Maryland, on July 28, 2021, the stop initially appeared to be about traffic violations. But as officers checked her information, more problems began to surface. The vehicle had questionable registration, the tags were fake, and Johnson did not have a valid driver's license. Her car was going to be towed. And that was when everything changed. As Johnson began removing belongings from the vehicle, the officer noticed something strange. The smell was getting worse. Much worse. The trunk was packed with bags, blankets, clothing, and personal belongings. Johnson had an explanation. Dirty laundry. She said the smell was coming from dirty clothes. But the officer had smelled enough death scenes to know that this was different. This was not garbage. This was not spoiled food. And it definitely was not dirty laundry. He called another officer over. "Come smell this." The second officer approached. Then his expression changed. Within moments, the officers were staring at the trunk. Neither of them knew exactly what they were about to find. But they knew something was terribly wrong. And then the search began. Bag after bag was moved. Blankets were pulled aside. The deeper officers searched, the stronger the odor became. Johnson became increasingly anxious. She watched every movement. Every item the officers touched seemed to make her more nervous. Then they found something buried among the clutter. A suitcase. One officer asked Johnson about it. Her behavior changed immediately. According to charging documents, as officers investigated the trunk, Johnson attempted to conceal the contents of the suitcase with a blanket. But when the covering was moved, the horrifying reality began to emerge. The officer froze. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then the scene exploded into chaos. The officers backed away. Their voices changed. Backup was called. Johnson was taken into custody. What began as a traffic stop had suddenly become a homicide investigation. Inside the vehicle were the decomposing remains of 2 children. The children were later identified as Johnson's niece, Jocelyn Marie James Johnson, and her nephew, Larry Darnell O'Neill. They were 7 and 5 years old. Police said one set of remains had been concealed in a suitcase, while the other was discovered elsewhere in the trunk area. But the discovery raised a question far more disturbing than the traffic stop itself. How long had they been there? The answer was almost impossible to comprehend. Investigators began piecing together the children's final months. Johnson had been caring for them. She was supposed to be the adult responsible for protecting them. Instead, investigators would uncover allegations of severe abuse and neglect. And somehow, after the children died, no emergency call was made. No hospital was contacted. No police report was filed. Their disappearance did not immediately trigger the kind of alarm that should have followed 2 young children suddenly vanishing. Instead, investigators alleged their bodies remained hidden inside the same vehicle Johnson continued to use. As detectives questioned her, the story became even more disturbing. Johnson eventually gave investigators accounts of incidents involving both children. Authorities alleged that abuse and neglect contributed to their deaths, although decomposition complicated efforts to determine the precise medical cause in at least one case. But for the officers standing beside that road, those details would come later. At that moment, they were simply trying to process what they had seen. A routine traffic stop. A strange smell. A trunk full of belongings. And beneath it all, 2 children who should have been alive. One of the most haunting parts of the case was that the discovery was not the result of a missing person investigation. It was not a major manhunt. It was not an anonymous tip. It came down to something almost unbelievably ordinary. A police officer pulled over a speeding car, and then he trusted his instincts. Because if the vehicle had not been stopped that night, how much longer would the secret have remained hidden? How many more miles could that car have traveled? How many people might have passed it without ever knowing what was inside? Nicole Johnson was charged in connection with the deaths and the concealment of the children's bodies, and the case exposed a devastating series of failures surrounding two children who had disappeared from public view. But the image that remains is the beginning, not the courtroom, not the charges, not even the arrest. It is that police officer standing beside a car on a dark road, a smell drifting through the air, a trunk filled with bags, and a woman insisting that there is nothing inside but dirty laundry. Because sometimes, the darkest secrets are not hidden in abandoned buildings or remote forests. Sometimes, they are sitting quietly in the trunk of a car, waiting for one small mistake to bring everything to light.